Sup you beautiful people, hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to another new episode of What If Deku Had the Powers of inFAMOUS. All he ever wanted was to be a hero. All he ever wanted was to save people. Well, be careful what you wish for Izuku Midoriya, because the universe just might grant it, in the worst possible way. If you guys enjoy this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel after watching this video. Don't forget to shower some appreciation onto the incredible author responsible for this fanfiction. The link is conveniently waiting for you in the description box down below. Before we get into it though, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. To say he had cut it close when he got home would have been more than an understatement, having only just got into his room before he heard the sound of his mother's alarm go off. He had done his best to stow everything away, hiding his new earpiece in his desk and placing his clothes back in his closet. He's remembered the look his mother gave him when he entered the kitchen, looking like a fresh zombie and having to quickly manufacture a lie about not sleeping well. Which wasn't entirely false, as the bright light of the classroom stung at his tired eyes and forced him to shade them with his hand. As the pain lessened, his mind turned to all the questions his time in the Neon District had answered, but also all the new questions it posed. He'd only heard the last of the 3 messages he and Moya had found, but the one he'd heard was fresh in his mind. John had sounded frantic, breathing heavy as if he'd just run a marathon, and he mentioned a man named Kessler, the name alone sending a shiver down her spine. Whoever he was, he knew he had to be important. And then there was that sickness that those people were suffering from. How many were already infected? How far had it spread? As he looked around, he didn't see anyone that was pale or coughing, so a small part of him hoped that what Moya said had been true. And the thought of the sickness then turned his mind again to its possible creators, as the image of that white hooded reaper came to mind. When he had first fought them all those weeks ago, he'd thought they were just a street gang, but he was wrong. They were armed, organized, and like that message said, preparing for something big. But for now, he was just a regular high schooler, and his thoughts of the night would have to be picked up later as he looked over to where Tsu was sitting. She looked so different now, not unrecognizable, but anyone could tell something had changed. But she seemed to be doing well with her change, and he was happy for that, but their conversation had given him a lot to think about. He'd always wanted a quirk, but he had never thought about how he might have gotten one that actively hurt him. And after all that happened for him to get his powers, he guessed the old saying was true. Grass is always greener on the other side. Hey Izuku, Mineta said, waving a hand in his face to get his attention. You notice she looks different, like really different, he asked, motioning his head towards Tsu, who seemed to be thinking about something. Izuku nodded his head. I'll tell you about it after school, he told him as memories of their night together came to him. He'd been surprised himself by how he acted. The old Midoriya would have never been able to kiss a girl without warning, too busy tripping over his own words. But that Midoriya was gone. After all he'd been through, he had learned a valuable lesson. Life was short, he liked her and she liked him back, and that was all he needed to know. I am here, coming through the door like a hero, the bombastic voice of All Might said as the classroom door burst open, and all eyes turned wide with excitement as they saw him. Izuku stared in surprise as anxiety filled him, a feeling that up until a few weeks ago he never would have had when seeing the #1 hero. He remembered well the last time he had seen him. His large figure standing above him with his hand on his shoulder as he told him it wasn't his fault. He'd had no idea that All Might would be a teacher as he struggled to think of how to act. Hey Izuku. Isn't that his Silver Age suit? Mineta asked, sitting in his seat beside him. Yeah, it is, he answered back, not taking his eyes off him as he strode in, red cape fluttering behind him. Welcome boys and girls to the single most important class here at UA High. Heroing 101, here you will learn that it means to be a hero and fight in the name of good, he announced, pumping up the whole class for what he was planning. And for your first class, we're gonna jump right into the thick of it with battle training, he hollered as the class erupted with enthusiasm. But some of their enthusiasm was darker than others as Bakugo turned to look at Izuku, his face a sadistic grin. And one of the keys to being a hero is looking good, he said as pieces of the wall began to slide out, revealing containers numbered 1 to 30. What was inside those containers were their hero costumes, and as everyone else hurried to see how their costume designs had panned out, Izuku clutched tightly to his school bag and the contents within. Izuku stared at his new green jumpsuit, remembering the smile on his mother's face when she had gifted the home-made hero suit to him this morning. She had apparently seen some of his old designs in his notebooks, and though he was deeply thankful, it made him redouble his efforts to hide his things. Clutching it tightly in his hands, it was so different to the costume he'd used to stalk through the neon, but perhaps that was for the best. He didn't want to use the same costume and get spotted. It wouldn't take much for someone to put two and two together about his identity. "That's your costume?" Kirishima questioned, leaning on the lockers as he eyed the jumpsuit. "Seems pretty plain for someone with a quirk like yours." "Indeed. It is not flashy at all," the French kid he had learned was named Aoyama said. "It was a gift from my mom," Izuku answered, happy that he was blessed to have a mother like her. "Dang, that's nice," Kirishima said with a fanged smile, nodding his head as he turned away. After that, the boys filed out of the changing room, each eager to use their costumes. Izuku, though, was the last, and with one final breath put it on, though he had decided against wearing the headpiece and mask, thinking it looked a little too much like All Might as the sound of the zipper echoed loudly in the now empty room. Opening the door to the hallway and turning to his right, he saw what could have possibly been one of the strangest things he had ever seen. Or rather, what he didn't see as the door to the girls' changing room opened, and out walked a pair of floating gloves and shoes. "What the?" he questioned to himself, his tired mind instinctively unleashing a radar pulse and getting way more than he had bargained for. "I am so sorry," he nearly screamed, immediately turning away and raising a hand to shield his vision. But then the fact that his radar pulse was omnidirectional, and he could see her even without looking where she was reared its head. The invisible girl quickly turned around, a mask of confusion on her face as she watched what looked to her as a random outburst. "What are you talking about?" Sorry for what she asked, cocking her head to the side and looking thoroughly confused over why he was acting the way he was. I can see you," he admitted, trying to sound as apologetic as he could as he watched the look on her face change from confusion to one of pure shock and then to one of anger. "You're lying," she accused, pointing a shaky finger at his chest, eyes wide and lips pursed. "I promise I'm not," he pleaded, hands still raised and eyes facing away. "My quirk lets me see the bioelectricity inside people." "I can see you clear as day," he admitted, swallowing hard as he watched her heart rate climb higher and higher, her eyes shifting around and looking for something he couldn't guess. "How many fingers am I holding up?" she asked, ripping off both of her gloves and lifting her bare right hand. "5, he answered truthfully as the invisible girl pulled her hand back as if it had been touched by fire. She then quickly put both hands behind her back and asked again. And he told her the truth, 2, 7, 5, 10, 1, 8, giving her answers in rapid succession until her shoulders slumped and her mouth hung open. "Oh my God, someone can see, you can see me," she nearly whimpered as she looked like she was about to hyperventilate. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to. I'll sit out on this exercise," he offered as he began to walk back into the changing room. He was only stopped when he felt a hand grasp his own in a tight grip. Her breathing was quick and uneven, her body shifting in place nervously before she gave him a look that was all but begging him to stay. "Wait, what color are my eyes?" she gasped out, her lips quivering and tears beginning to flow down her cheeks like twin rivers. Looking into her eyes and watching the electrical impulses flow too, and from he honestly couldn't see what color her eyes were. But as he saw the impulses in her tear ducts flare more and more, he didn't have the heart to tell her that. "Your eyes are blue," he answered as her lips began to quiver. "Blue. My eyes are blue," she repeated again and again like a mantra, rocking herself back and forward. Izuku didn't know what to do in a situation like this. Should he comfort her? Should he give her space? Should he? That decision was made for him as the girl leapt forward and embraced him in a hug so tight it rivaled his mother's. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," she cried as she wrapped her arms around his waist and pressed her body into him. Izuku froze up, the idea of a naked woman hugging him and crying making his brain stall. But even as he stood still as a statue, she continued to sob into his shoulder, with only the blubbering, muffled words of thank you repeating again and again. It was only when he began to feel her slip, her legs no longer having the strength to hold herself up, did he hug her back, if only to keep her from falling. Still unsure of how to handle the situation, he thought back to times where he had as sad as this, and memories of his mother comforting him gave him an idea of what to do. It's okay," he began to repeat, holding her tight and rubbing her back in reassurance as she struggled to breathe between sobs. They stayed like that for a long moment before she finally let go, his shoulder now completely wet. "I'm sorry about that," she said, regaining some of her composure and pointing to the wet spot on his shoulder. Izuku brushed it off, more concerned about the girl in front of him than anything else. "I'm Toru Hagakure, by the way," she introduced, smiling and bringing a small sense of normalcy into this strange encounter. "Oh, I'm Izuku Midoriya," he said, offering his hand, to which she accepted and told him that she already knew his name. They then both stood there, looking at each other and both unsure of how to proceed after everything that had just happened. "Look what just happened," he tried to say before Toru shook her head. "It's okay. I won't tell the teachers if you won't," she quickly promised, nodding her head enthusiastically. "No, but I might need to use my radar pulse again," he tried to explain before she went to pick up her gloves and Izuku had to look away again. "I don't mind," she nearly giggled, beaming a smile so bright it was blinding. "Come on, they're probably waiting for us," she said as she began towards the training area, a delighted spring in her step. Izuku was completely floored by her reaction and had no idea how he had gotten out of that situation without getting slapped. Shaking his head and thanking whatever gods there were, he walked after her until the light of the sun fell on their faces. Looking around, they could see they were inside one of the mock cities they had used for the entrance exam. "Hey Midoriya, what took you so long? Love your costume, by the way," Uraraka praised as she walked up to him. "I should have been more specific about what I wanted though. This costume's skin tight," she said, smiling sheepishly and rubbing the back of her head. Izuku, though, had had his fill of looking at people's bodies, looking away and noticing Mineta walking up to them. Izuku's mood was lightened when he saw that he had thankfully taken his advice on his costume, ditching that ugly diaper-looking thing and replacing it with a normal utility belt. He'd also taken his advice and had a cape in the shape of grape leaves. "God, I love this school," Mineta said as he flashed Izuku a knowing smile, to Izuku, who just shook his head. He could change the costume, but the man remained the same. "All right, you bunch of newbies, for today's lesson will be," All Might tried to say before he was interrupted by a storm of questions, ranging from the consequences of losing to whether or not Aoyama's cape looked nice. "I wasn't finished talking," All Might said, restraining his voice as he pulled out a small notepad. "For this training exercise, the villains have obtained a nuclear bomb and hidden it in their hideout. It'll be a 6-man match with 3 villains and 3 heroes. The heroes win by either capturing the villains or securing the device. Likewise, the villains win by either taking down the heroes or protect the device," he said as the image of the ray sphere explosion filled his mind. "Teams have already been pre-selected and battles will be decided by lots," he said as he revealed a small yellow box. "So let's get started. Teams: Team H, Tokoyami Tsuyu, Monoma vs. Team J, Zero Kirishima Yosutsu. Team G, Kaminari Gyro Ajiro vs. Team C, Mineta Momo Pony. Team A, Izuku Achako Hagakure vs. Team D, Ida Bakugo Ryaiko. Team E, Mina Aoyama Kamakiri vs. Team F, Kaibara Kinoko Ibara. Team B, Shoji Todoroki Shihai vs. Team I, Setsuna Kendo Juzo." When Izuku saw the teams, he had forced himself to not groan in pain. They were going first, and not only was he going to have to face Bakugo, but he was also going to have to be with the invincible girl who he now knew was named Hagakure. It wasn't that he disliked her. It was just that after their first encounter, he didn't really believe she'd want to be around him. "Everyone else can head to the monitoring room to watch," All Might said as they began to leave, with Mineta and Sue giving knowing looks as they passed. Looking to his left, he was greeted by the familiar glare of Bakugo, drilling into him. "Yep, it's gonna be one of those days," he thought to himself as he looked back at him, unflinching, which only stoked his anger further. "Come on Izuku, let's win this," Hagakure said, pumping her gloved fist with enthusiasm. Izuku still couldn't get on a read on her openness and enthusiasm appearing to contradict what had happened. But it seemed he was not going to get any kind of answer until after the fight. After that, All Might instructed Bakugo's team to enter the building and gave them a 5-minute timer to get ready before the heroes went in. "Wow, this place is huge. Do they really expect us to remember it all?" Achako said. "And All Might's just as cool in person as he is on TV, and he isn't even threatening us with punishment, so this should be..." She was about to finish before she noticed the intense stare he was giving the building. Izuku was focused as different plans filtered through his mind. He knew that Iida had a speed quirk, Bakugo's explosions, and that Ryaiko girl. His mind tried to dig back to when they had their assessment test. He had seen her cover the ball in a purple glow and sending it flying nearly a kilometer away. It seemed to be some sort of telekinesis quirk like his mother's, but he couldn't be certain. And then there was how he was going to deal with Bakugo. How was he going to deal with him? From what he could tell from the building layout, they had been given the inside consisted of narrow metal corridors, the perfect place for someone with a quirk like his. "You're thinking about Bakugo, aren't you?" Ochako guessed, which brought Izuku back into the real world. "He's gonna come for me," he said as he walked forward and turned to look at both Ochako and Hagakure. "He's dangerous, so I'm gonna lure him out," he proposed, as the words of Tsu filled his mind. If he could do that to a building-sized robot, then he didn't want to think about what he could do to either of them. "Once I do, you and Hagakure are going to find the bomb and secure it," he said as the two girls looked to each other. "I'll go first. My quirk will let me sneak in with Uraraka following behind me in case I find someone," Hagakure volunteered as she pulled off her gloves and kicked off her shoes. "All right, let's do this. But first, both of you face the wall and cover your eyes," he instructed, but received a confused look from Ochako. "I'm going to lure him out, trust me," Izuku said, and with only mild prodding from Hagakure, they both walked and pressed themselves against the wall. With less than a minute left before the match began, he started coalescing energy. After he had absorbed those blast shards, he had never felt more powerful, and now it was time to show it. He'd just have to hit this at the right angle. Meanwhile, inside the building. "So this is the bomb, fake of course," Iida said as he tapped the cartoonish papier-mâché prop with the back of his hand. "Still, even to play the role of villain doesn't sit well with me. The roles we play upon the stage are rarely our choice," came the monotone voice of Ryuko. The silver-haired woman wore a similarly colored kimono with a puffy color and mask that hid her mouth, though it did little to hide her dour eyes. "Indeed, we must stay on our toes. With Midoriya on their team this will be," Iida tried to say before Bakugo cut. "Both of you, shut the hell up," growled Bakugo as wisps of steam flowed off his body. His breathing could be heard even from where they were standing. "He's nothing, I must ask, but why do you seem to hate him so much?" Iida politely asked, but was not replied to verbally as the temperature in the room began to increase. "You two extras should stay in your lane and focus on the bomb. Deku is mine," he berated in a cold tone as the buzzer signaling the beginning of the training match sounded. But none of them were prepared for what came next, as the windows on the room were violently shattered by an unseen force. Like rain, the shards of glass fell onto the tile. Everyone instinctively looked outside, and a familiar voice. As the buzzer rang, Izuku wasted no time, unleashing a radar pulse and seeing they were on the 5th floor, and doing his best to ignore the naked forms of the girls with him. He then sent out a shockwave up the side of the building and shattered the windows on every floor. Filling his lungs, he drew upon all the pain that man had caused him and Mineta, and yelled, "Hey you blonde coward, come out here and face me." He roared and did not have to wait long. "5th floor go," he ordered as Bakugo came rushing out of the building on jets of heat, flying straight at Izuku with the force of a rocket. Izuku barely had time to dodge, rolling to the right and letting the force of his landing carrying him further as he slammed into the street, kicking up a cloud of dust and concrete. Ochako and Hagakure thankfully had followed the plan and were heading towards the bomb. He just needed to put his faith in them, and by them time. "Who are you calling a coward, you bastard?" Bakugo screamed as he launched himself again, coming so close Izuku could see the white of his eyes as he unleashed another shockwave, Bakugo being unable to overpower it as it sent him flying through the glass of a nearby storefront. "Young Midoriya, what are you doing?" All Might asked through their earpiece. "Goading a villain out of his hideout is a perfectly sound strategy, sir," he answered back as he watched where Bakugo had been flung into. He had no illusions that that would be enough to stop him, and he was proven right as the slow, rhythmic sound of breaking glass and heat grew closer and closer. "You think you so smart, huh?" he hissed as he walked into view. "Don't think I didn't see you eyeing me during the assessment test. Your little frog bitch probably told you all about it, so take a good look," he said as he lifted his right as small detonations in the shape of atoms went off in his hand. "You got your quirk from that explosion. Well, I got something too," he continued with a sadistic grin. "I'm sure you know a lot about my powers that let me produce nitroglycerin sweat. But now I can fuse their atoms together and use that energy for my explosions. So come on then, you annoying bastard, show me what you got." Ochako and Hagakure made their way through the winding corridors of the building. Like the plan had said, Hagakure had taken the lead, with Ochako following behind and using the visible earpiece in Toru's ear to know where she was. "Do you know why Izuku said the bomb would be on the 5th floor?" Ochako asked as the snuck around another corner. "He said that he can sense electricity, including the bioelectricity in people," Hagakure said, and though she couldn't see it sounded like she was smiling. "Wow, that's handy," Ochako said as she thought over the growing list of powers Midoriya seemed to have access to. Their thoughts were interrupted as explosion after explosion rattled the building, lines of dust and chips of ceiling falling around them. "I hope Midoriya is alright," Ochako said. She hadn't really understood him when he said Bakugo was dangerous, but now she was getting the idea. "The quicker we capture the bomb, the quicker this ends. Come on," Hagakure urged as they began moving again. She was right, she just needed to do her best and hope Izuku can handle him. Moving silently, they finally reached the 5th floor, and it was just as quiet as the last 4, the tension rising with every step. Peering behind a corner, she turned and whispered to Ochako. "I found the bomb," she whispered lightly as Ochako looked down the hall and saw the light of day, and with it the bomb. It was sitting in the middle of a large room, but from where they were standing couldn't see Ida or Ryuko. "I'll go first," Toru said, to which Ochako nodded her head in agreement. After all, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Moving as silently as she could along the wall to the door, she peeked her head inside and saw Ida having what she thought was an entirely one-sided argument with someone on the other end of his earpiece. But she still couldn't find Ryuko, but as she took her first step inside, her foot felt something wet, and she was immediately with everything from planks of wood to metal cans. Toru shrieked in response as she fell backwards and heard the exaggerated evil laughter of Ida from behind the door. "Is that you, Hagakure? Hahaha, we knew you would try to sneak inside, so we devised a little road block for you involving these large oil drums," he said as Toru saw that the floor in the room was completely covered in water. "You might be able to hide from our eyes, but you cannot hide your affects upon the world," Ryuko said from some unknown location inside the room. "You are doomed heroes. The bomb is ours, and we shall reign victorious. Ahahaha." Ida continued to laugh as Toru quickly moved back. "Well, that didn't work. Any ideas?" Toru asked, angered and gently rubbing the spots she had been at. Ochako bit her lips as she thought they had the room secure and anyway all but required them touching the floor unless. "I think I might have something," she said with a focused determination. Reaching up to her earpiece, she began to speak. Bakugo bellowed as he lunged out of the store, destroying in a shower of brick and mortar with hands glowing with vicious intent. Izuku tried to use his shockwave again, but Bakugo used his other hand to change his trajectory, arcing clean over the oncoming surge of energy and blasting Izuku right in the back. Izuku breathed through his teeth as his back was scorched, his muscles tensing as the explosion sent him skidding across the ground. Izuku clenched his jaw as he used his momentum to get back up to his feet, turning and shooting a bolt of electricity back at Bakugo. Bakugo was fast, but he wasn't fast enough to dodge lightning as the electricity surged through his body and his muscles convulsed. "Damn it, nuclear fusion. Why the hell did he have to get such a strong power?" He screamed internally as he smelt something burning and looked at his smoking back and realized to his horror that his costume had a massive hole in it, the material burned away by Bakugo's blast. "What's the matter, Deku? Too scared to move, or are you too busy crying over your shitty costume mommy bought for you?" Bakugo mocked as he shook of the effects of the shock and set off more small explosions in his hands. "This is what true power looks like, so use whatever plans you have in that little head of yours because you'll never beat me." Izuku stared daggers into Bakugo, the memories and promise he'd made bringing forth an anger that burned his insides. He had tried so hard to be kind to that bastard, taking years of abuse, taken the threats and the insults, but that was it. This wasn't just for him, this was for his friend who stood by him as they suffered him together. This was for the greatest mother in the world that had to watch in silence as her son came home with smoking hair and singed clothes day after day, because no one had ever held him to anything because of his stupid fucking quirk. Not his teachers, not his parents, but he was going to make him pay for all of it. "You piece of shit," he screamed as he charged the blonde. Bakugo stunned for only a moment as his mocking grin turned soured, and he matched his charge with a feral zeal. As the charged, and even in his enraged state, Izuku's mind could recognize the pattern he'd seen all his life. Bakugo always started his fights with his right arm, and Izuku took full advantage as he grasped it in both hands and threw him over his shoulder and slammed him into the ground hard enough to shatter the asphalt beneath them. Izuku did not let him get up, climbing onto him and slamming his weight onto his chest, punching him 3 times straight to the face before he could properly defend himself. Izuku kept going, trying to pound through his defenses even as the air around him grew hotter and hotter, until Bakugo pressed his glowing hand to his face, the heat searing his flesh as he tried to pry it off. But what happened next took him by complete surprise. As his electricity-covered hand grasped the grenade-shaped gauntlet, it exploded violently. The resulting shockwave shattering windows and launching Izuku clear off of Bakugo and straight into a guardrail, the metal deforming as his body slammed into it. The wind was knocked out of his lungs as he struggled to bring air back into his lungs. What had that been, he wondered, but the answer came to him quickly. Bakugo's sweat was like nitroglycerin, and his electricity must have set it off. But that had been bigger than his normal blasts, had he been storing sweat in his gauntlets. His train of thought was slowed, though, as the pain in his face was excruciating. Bringing a shaky hand to his face, and fingers delicately prodding the burn, he looked through the dust cloud, and saw Bakugo beginning to pull himself up. But as the dust cleared, he saw that Bakugo had suffered more than he had. His right arm had snapped, hanging like a broken branch wafting in the wind, with only bruised, discolored skin keeping the pieces together. He wondered if the fight would be stopped because of his injury, but as he stared into his red eyes, he realized that unless All Might told him to, he wasn't going to stop because of a broken arm. As Izuku pulled himself up as well, he saw that Bakugo, despite his bloodlust, was running hot now, his body glowing like metal in a furnace, the air becoming so hot it was getting hard to breathe. He wondered if that was his weakness, that like him and Tsu, he had a limit, that he could only get so hot before he shut down. He prayed that his hypothesis was correct because he was running low on energy. "You're so pathetic," Izuku spoke through gritted teeth as he worked through the pain. 10 years of abuse, 10 years of suffering in silence, unable to do anything by take it from someone who talked so much about how he was so much better than everyone else. Well, no more. No more and never again, because this worthless Deku just broke your fucking arm, he growled, letting the pain in his face fuel the venom in his words. If he had thought Bakugo was mad before, now he was furious, eyes practically glowing as he unleashed another massive explosion, aiming to kick his head clean off. Izuku drew his hand back again, intending to shoot the other gauntlet and cause whatever had happened before. But instead of a simple lightning bolt, what left his hand was a condensed ball of energy. It was relatively slow in comparison, and Bakugo would have had no trouble evading it, but with his broken arm, he had no way of changing course, as the missile struck him hard in the chest with another large explosion that sent him flying back and smashing through the third-story window of another building. Izuku began to stumble after that, whatever that was running on fumes, as the vision around his eyes began to lose color. He looked around, desperate to find another source of electricity, and finally saw another light post. But it was too far. Bakugo would surely come rushing back before he could get there. But then he was struck by an idea as he finally pulled out his electro whip and swung it forward, wrapping it around the post, using it as a medium to drain the electricity into himself as the color began to return and the pain in his face diminished. But he did not have time to relax as Bakugo rushed out of the hole he made, soaring through the air on his one good arm and landing on the roof of a building, breathing heavy as he sneered at him. "Izuku, we need your help," came the voice of Ochako in his ear. "I'm a little busy," he stressed as he waited for Bakugo to do something. It wasn't like him to wait. "We're outside the bomb room and we need a distraction," she asked. "Such as?" "Lead Bakugo to the base of the building, make him blow up one of the corners," she instructed as Izuku's eyes went wide. "Are you crazy?" he yelled. "Trust me, Midoriya," she pleaded, as Bakugo rushed out of the hole he made, soaring through the air on his one good arm and landing on the roof of a building, breathing heavy as he sneered at him. "That was a lucky shot, you hear me? But let me show you what I can do," he roared, a manic smile crossing his lips as Izuku's eyes went wide. What he did next, however, stunned him as his broken arm began to glow brighter and brighter until, with one strangled scream that sounded like the mix of a wounded animal and a demon, he snapped the broken bones back into place with a loud crack. Flexing his fingers, he looked down at him, the hand glowing white-hot as he relished in his power. Ochako was right. He didn't really have a better plan and needed to trust his teammates. As he looked at Bakugo, and despite his bloodlust, he could see he was getting tired, his body glowing so bright he could see his skeleton. "Since I got your attention again, let me tell you that these gauntlets ain't just for show, they also collect my sweat. So tell me, you stupid bastard, what do you think will happen when I fuse their atoms all at once?" he threatened with glee as he landed on the roof of a building, steam pouring out his mouth with every breath. "Bakugo, stop, you'll kill him," All Might yelled as Izuku took off running towards the test building. He could do it, he just needed to move. "Ochako, do it now. He'll live if he dodges," Bakugo cackled as he pulled the pin on his gauntlet, and a flash of light as bright as the sun rocked the entire street. At Izuku's signal, Ochako put her plan into motion. With Toru climbing onto her back, she touched both, making them weightless as the building was slammed by a massive explosion that rocked it to its very foundation. Her heart was beating in her ears as she jumped, souring through the hallway as the whole building began to lean to the left. Memories of her childhood, of days spent trying to fly through the hole of her tire swing filled her mind. Just like the swing, he said as two soared through the open door. Ida, even with all the chaos around them, still tried to intercept them, but now the water worked against them as he slipped and slid across the ground. Ochako smiled despite the fear, but as they were about to touch the bomb it moved on its own, a purple shimmer coating it as the pair landed feet first on the wall. "Nice try," the voice of Ryuko uttered as the silver-haired girl finally revealed herself. She had been using the junk in the room for levitation, completely unaffected by the moving building. "Toru, get the bomb," Ochako screamed as Ryuko began to move the bomb in every direction, trying to keep it out of the invisible girl's hands. But she should have been more focused on herself as an invisible fist clocked her across the jaw, stunning her and giving Ochako the opening she needed. Jumping with all her might, she surged towards the falling bomb and clamped onto it hard. "I've got it," Ochako roared in triumph as the buzzer sounded. Heroes win. Everyone in the observation room stared in shock at the battle they had just witnessed, most having been too enthralled by the duel between Midoriya and Bakugo to notice what had happened with the others. The practice building had been demolished, leaning on another building for support, as the left corner had been completely destroyed, and in its place was a hole nearly 20 feet deep. Everyone watched as the smoke began to clear, hoping to see that Izuku had survived, all except All Might himself, as the symbol of peace raced towards the destruction with the speed of a bullet. Ada and Sue both looked to each other, their faces dripping with fear and worry. Had they just watched their best friend die? "Look, I see someone walking out," Kirishima said as a darkened figure limped out of the smoke. "It's Midoriya, he's alive," Mina cheered as the tension visibly left the room. "Oh my god, that was too intense," Zero said, his shoulders slacking in relieved tension. "They were really going at it," Mina said in bewilderment. She had witnessed her fair share of fights in grade school, but this was something more. "Hey Mineta, do Izuku and Bakugo know each other?" she asked as all eyes turned to him. Bakugo went to the same school as us," he said, freezing at first before answering, which only furthered her suspicions. Coupled that with what Tsuyu had said about them meeting in the hospital after the blast in Mustafu, the pieces began to fall into place. And as she looked at the screen that showed Bakugo, tired and beaten, a small smile spread across her face and a single thought came to mind. "Good job, Midoriya." Izuku let out a long sigh, a slight stream of smoke coming out of his lungs as he coughed. He could barely feel the left side of his body, and the right side felt like it was on fire. Happy though to still be among the living, he looked around to see that he was inside what once was supposed to be the lobby, or at least what was left of it. Looking down at his ruined costume, he felt his mood darken. The entire left sleeve had been destroyed, and it was only the collar that was keeping it from sliding off. He felt a lone tear fall from his eye as he looked at it. "I'm sorry, Mom. Young Midoriya, are you all right?" the voice of All Might asked as Izuku lifted a shaky hand towards his ear, only to find that his earpiece had fallen out. He then felt a hand on his shoulder and realized that he was actually there. Looking up, he saw the mountain of a man standing before him. "I'm okay, sir, just need some juice," he answered, his world spinning as he looked for anything electrical. "You seem rather burned. I will call for the nurse," All Might said, but Izuku shook his head as he heard the telltale sound of electrical discharge. Moving towards the sound, he found an exposed wire and gasped it, letting the thousands of volts wash over his body as the pain and numbness faded. "I feel better now," he said, his mind now working in proper order. All Might, looking surprised at the display of accelerated healing, gave a thumbs up as the sound of several footsteps grew closer. "Midoriya, we did it," came the voice of Ochako, cheering as she walked down the ruined steps with Toru helping Ryuko walk down and Ida not far behind. Her excitement was infectious as jumped for joy, making Izuku smile as well. "Great work, Ochako. Your plan worked," Midoriya said as the evidence of his victory finally came into view. Turning his head, he looked further down the street to see his former bully walking up to them, a 1,000-yard stare in his eyes, as which made the victory so much sweeter. His body wasn't glowing anymore, but steam still wafted off of him. And his arm, once broken, now seemed fine. It seemed a healing factor as well. All Might, seeing the boy, went to check on him and put a hand on his shoulder, the action seeming to pull him out of whatever tailspin of thought he was in. "Do not be discouraged, young Bakugo. As long as you're willing to learn, a defeat is only an opportunity to improve," he advised. Izuku could only shake his head at the #1 hero's attempt. He'd tried to be nice to Bakugo for 10 years, and it didn't get him anywhere, and he highly doubted that would change anytime soon. Now then, children, we shall review your battle in the observation room, All Might said as he turned and led them to the rest of the class. As soon as Izuku entered the room, he was swarmed by his classmates. Smiling faces of astonishment filling his view. Well, most of them. If you ever do something crazy like that again, I'll kill you myself, Mineta warned, pointing a shaky finger at him as he struggled to keep from leaping for joy at his friend's survival. That was insane, Midoriya. How did you survive that? Kirishima asked, fang-filled mouth smiling wide. Oh, I used my polarity wall, he said as he pointed his right arm away from everyone and emitted a large circular field that bathed room in blue. It basically turns anything it touches into energy for me to use, he explained as he looked to Mineta, who understood what he was getting at, pulling a ball of his head and throwing it at the shield. As soon as the ball and the shield made contact, the hairball disintegrated with nothing left to show it had ever existed, the demonstration kicking off another round surprise and admiration for his powerful quirk, except for one. Well, in spite of the results, the MVP of this match is young Ryuko, the deep voice of All Might announced, surprising the whole class and most of all Ryuko herself. Shouldn't it be one of the heroes? They won after all, came the anxious voice of Kinoko Komari. You would think so. Why didn't I pick one of those three? Any guesses? All Might inquired as the tall raven-haired girl raised her hand immediately. I can answer that. Ryuko was the one who most thoroughly embraced this challenge and the one who most accurately adapted to her assigned role, she said as she explained further. Bakugo allowed his personal history with Midoriya to cloud his judgment, allowing himself to be lured away by Midoriya so he could not assist his teammates. Likewise, using such a powerful weapon like his gauntlets in the direction of the bomb was a foolish move. Similarly, Midoriya also allowed his personal history with Bakugo to cloud his judgment, seemingly having no plan outside of luring Bakugo away. Also, when he had thrown Bakugo to the ground, he could have attempted to use his capture tape to secure a victory, but instead continued to fight him. He allowed his anger to get the better of him. As for Uraraka and Hagakure, their plan was far too reckless, relying on too many variables that if not met could have been disastrous. If they had treated the bomb as if it were real, they never would have gone through with it. And though Ida prepared for their enemy's arrival, even using water as a means of locating Hagakure, it was that same water that prevented him from stopping them. Ryuko meanwhile kept a cool head throughout the exercise, sticking to her assigned role to protect the dummy weapon at all cost, even while the building was falling. All in all, she respected the spirit of the trial the most. She finished as everyone stared at her. Even All Might look to the girl in shock, stunned that she had been able to explain it better than he could. Well, yes. That about covers it, he said as he quickly issued for the next round to begin. Battle 2, Team G versus Team C. To say that Mineta was happy with his current partners would have been something of an understatement. There was the lovely Momo, whose costume played to all her strengths, and Pony, who had been surprised to see again after first meeting her. And while the horse legs were a bit of a turn-off, she had a cute face. Truly, the only way this could have been better would have been if Shiozaki had been on his team. Out of all the girls in class, he could confidently say she was the best. Sure, some had bigger boobs, a nicer ass. But when everything was put together, there was no competition. Maybe it was because she had been so nice to him. He wouldn't have been surprised if she had expected the worst when she had woken up to his face during the exam. Or maybe it was because he was a hopeless romantic beneath all the horny. One, the other, or maybe both, he didn't really know. So whatever happened to that guy you was sitting next to on the bus? The guy with the gas mask, Mineta asked Pony as they walked into the training building. Not no, once he gone, no see, she answered back in broken Japanese, her face turning into a frown. Mineta nodded his head along. After seeing him run away with that guy's gun, he'd wondered what happened before he got there. He'd seemed like a bit of a tool, but from the way she seemed to talk about him, maybe there had been more to him. It's not like he'd caught him at the best of times, going into a challenge you're all but certain to lose who piss anyone off. So what happened during the exam, he specified as the American transfer student seemed to think it over. Pony was fighting robots, then big robot come, many eyes. Many rockets shoot Pony and make her hit head. Big robot come closer and Pony scared it crush her. Then purple mist come and Pony see big man fall, see mustard take gun from big man and shoot robot. Got hard to breath, vision go blurry and dark, but remember mustard give helmet, she explained. Mustard, Mineta said, confused by the odd name. It how you say nickname. Funny joke I give about helmet, she said, smiling at the memory. If you two don't mind, shouldn't we focus more on the task at hand? Momo chided. Mineta rolled his eyes but agreed that it was time to get serious. After watching Midoriya's match with Bakugo, he needed to keep pushing himself. Pulling his hair balls out, he started sticking them to the floors and walls as they went, and concentrating the most around the hallway that led directly to the bomb room, and by the time they got in, a small trickle of blood was beginning to flow down the side of his head. As soon as they got in, Mono wasted little time as she started producing sheets of steel and placing them over the door. As she worked, he noticed the glare she gave him as he approached her. He half expected that. He had gotten quite the nosebleed when she demonstrated her quirk. "What do you want?" she asked suspiciously, turning to make sure that he couldn't look at her ass. Mineta simply smiled. He'd already had a good look at it on the walk here, so it didn't matter. Besides, a nice ass can wait. Now it was time to win. "I've got a plan to deal with Kaminari," he told her as all that training and theorizing with Midoriya was paying off, and he could see her expression turn from hostile to curious. What kind of plan? This was such bullshit, Kaminari seethed internally as they waited outside the building. When he had received his acceptance letter, he'd been beyond happy. He'd been ready to be a pro. But then he met Midoriya. At first, he'd been excited to meet someone with another electric quirk, and he was amazed at him fighting off those villains. But then he had met him, and he'd thought he was full of it. High hundred millions to low billions, he'd said. Kaminari had been stunned. That was impossible, beyond impossible. How could someone just as old as him have quirks so much stronger and with no downsides? "As long as I have something to drain, I can keep going," he'd said. But then he had watched him take on that Bakugo guy with everyone else, and with every second that ticked by, he felt his guts twisting, a heavy weight building on his shoulders. He had realized with horror that Midoriya hadn't been lying, just how much he could do and how much he couldn't, and he had been so causal when he explained it. As if creating a shield that can disintegrate stuff and apparently calling down lightning from the sky was like taking an evening stroll to him. "How the hell am I supposed to compete with that?" he thought to himself as he looked at his hands in dejection, arcs of yellow electricity dancing between his fingers before he balled them into fists. "Hey, what's your name again?" came a female voice. Looking up, he could see the annoyed face of Gyro looking back at him. "Oh, Kaminari," he stuttered out, his cheeks growing a shade of red as he looked at the cute girl. "Right, so your quirk is like Midoriya's?" she asked as he felt the anger beginning to fill him at the mention of his name. Of course he would be compared to him. He'd done it himself, and he was kicking himself for it. "Kinda," he said, the one-word answer drawing an irritated look from her. "Well, can you kinda deal with the balls in the hallway?" she asked as she pointed inside. Walking over to look inside, he could see that it was covered in Mineta's small purple hair balls. "Use a shockwave or zap them and see if you can get rid of them," she instructed as Kaminari furrowed his brow. "I can't," he answered back as he watched the light in her eyes die at the admission. "Oh, so what can you do?" she deadpanned, sounding thoroughly unimpressed by him. I can discharge electricity from my body, but I can't control where it goes, and it messes with my head if I use too much," he said, any feeling of self-worth disappearing like tears in the rain with every word he spoke. "Oh, that's nice," she deadpanned, the light in her eyes fading in disappointment as the sound of the buzzer for the match to begin cut through the air. "Whatever, we'll just walk around them." "Come on, Ajiro," she said, turning away from him with Ajiro only giving him pitying hand on his shoulder before moving on with Gyro. Kaminari walked with them, his mind not all there as they moved through the building. Can't you use those earphone things to find out where they are?" Ajiro asked, to which Gyro gained a smug smile. "Used to. Recently my hearing has gotten a lot better," she answered. Though they knew where to go, it took them longer thanks to the floor being covered in Mineta's balls, with one wrong step resulting in losing a shoe. When they finally reached the right floor and Kaminari saw the door that held the key to their victory further down the hall, he felt a spiteful rage fill his body. He'd just got here and already he was being looked down upon. He would not allow it. He was going to show them what he can do. "I'll go first," he said, and Gyro quirked her eyebrow at the declaration, aiming to speak before being cut off. "One of you break down the door and I'll rush in and hit them with everything I've got," he said, glaring at the door like it owed him money. Gyro gave him a look that all but screamed that Shed didn't believe he could do it, but eventually accepted. "You better know what you're doing," Gyro said in snide exhaustion as she faced the door and plugged her earphone jacks into her boots. What came next was a wave on sonic energy that blew the door straight off its hinges. Kaminari didn't even wait for the door to hit the ground as he charged the opening, the bomb clear in his sight. 1.3 million volts, he screamed, unleashing all his power as a surge of yellow electricity flowed out of his body. He was going to do it, he was going to win. "Villains win, huh," he said as his mind slowly came back to him. Kaminari looked around to see what happened and realized quickly he wasn't standing on the ground but was stuck to the wall by a pair of horns and saw the horse girl and Mineta looking at him with pity. "Sorry man," he said as he pointed a gloved finger to a large metal rod embedded in the floor. A grounding rod, the thought feeling like a punch to the gut, as tried to see what had happened to Ajiro and Gyro. Quickly he found Ajiro resting against the wall and nursing his ears while Gyro stood there, red as a tomato and missing one of her boots. "Sorry, but you were just outmatched," Momo said, as she held a flashbang in her hand and Kaminari hung his head. He had failed. Battle 2, Team B versus Team I. Shihai, Shoji and Todoroki stood by the building in silence, waiting for the buzzer to sound so that their battle could begin. "So what's the PL?" Shihai tried to say, but was interrupted by Todoroki raising his hand. "Wait," he said as the buzzer rang and the trio began to move towards the entrance. Without warning, Todoroki pressed his hand to the wall of the building and covered the building in a thick sheen of ice. With a quiet slap, something small fell from behind the doorway. Looking closely, Shihai was shocked to see that it was a human ear. Todoroki picked up as if it were just a dry leaf. "Now we can talk." He held the severed ear in his hand and plugged it. "Shihai, what is your quirk?" Todoroki asked, boy having half his body covered in ice. "My quirk is called Dark. It allows my body to merge with anything dark-colored," he answered as Todoroki listened. "Good, go in and deal with Juzo," he commanded as Shihai looked at him in anger. "And who are you to boss me around?" he challenged, already sick of his attitude as Todoroki turned to look at him. "Do you want to win or not?" he asked, his voice only mildly tinged with annoyance. Juzo's quirk allows him to soften any non-living thing he touches and swim in it as if it were water. "Your quirk allows you to move freely in darkness. I will destroy the lights, you will find Juzo and deal with him," he said in an almost tired tone as cold air began to circle around him and ice began to flow from his foot. The frost flowed up the wall and across the ceiling until it reached the lights, growing colder and colder until the lights shattered, covering the lobby in darkness. Not having a better idea, Shihai accepted the plan with a huff as he walked forward. Standing at the precipice, he picked up a pebble from the ground, tossed it at the tiled floor, the pebble immediately sinking into the hidden trap. Taking in a deep breath, he leapt forward and allowed deep into darkness. The darkness was his friend, the darkness was his home, and he would find any who would intrude upon it. His sense of sight had been taken from him in this watery abyss, but he could still hear, still feel, and that would be enough. Moving like a shark through the mud and capture tape in hand, he pounced on that feeling and felt the muscles of his prey tense in surprise. Like the trapdoor spider and the tarantula hawk wasp, the predator has become the prey, he waxed poetically as he wrapped his arm around his throat in a choke hold. Juzo tried to escape the hold, instinctively trying to pull him off. But he would not let go as the pair thrashed and flailed, Shihai only increasing the pressure around his neck as his other hand attempted to wrap him with the tape. Just as he managed to tie the tape around his bicep, Juzo erupted from his watery home like a whale, breaches the surface of the ocean, and right into the bomb room where Kendo and Setsuna were waiting. Before Shihai could flee back into the darkness, he was grasped by a pair of massive hands. "Good job getting him her Juzo," Kendo said with a smile. Not fast enough though, he answered back as he coughed and rubbed his throat, showing the capture tape wrapped around him. "Damn it, we can still win this if we," Kendo tried to say before the sound of ice cracking and slow footsteps could be heard further down the hall. Closer and closer it came until the eyes of Shoto Todoroki appeared. "You can try and fight, but I'll just freeze you solid," he said in a calm and intimidating tone as he walked up to the bomb and touched it. "Heroes win," came the voice of All Might as the buzzer sounded. As he did, Todoroki began to melt all the ice, turning the building into a sauna. "By the way, here's your ear back," he said as he tossed it to Setsuna, the woman glaring in anger at her defeat even as she reattached her ear. "Battle 3, Team H versus Team J. Are you ready, Shiro?" Kirishima said, pumping himself up and jumping on the spot as adrenaline filled his system. "Hell yeah," Shiro affirmed as he covered the bomb room in his elastic tape. After seeing the overwhelming power of Todoroki and the determination to win by Izuku, the two boys were more than eager to prove themselves. "By the way, what's your quirk?" Shiro asked to the third member of their group. "Oh, my quirk lets me bind things together at the atomic level," Yosutsu said as he demonstrated his quirk by binding a traffic cone to the wall. "That's awesome. Your quirk is perfect for this," Kirishima praised. "Go out there and fuse all the doors shut." Nodding in agreement, Yosutsu went to work. "So do you have a plan?" Shiro asked him, to which he shook his head. beyond reinforcing every door from here to there. No. Why do you? Kirishima admitted as Shiro began to smile. Yes, I do. Tsu rolled her neck. They waited for the buzzer. All of their opponents' quirks were either defensive in nature or couldn't be used to their full potential indoors. Still, though, that didn't give them an excuse to be arrogant. They needed to stay on their toes if they wanted to succeed. Don't worry, you two. With me at the helm, victory will be ours, came the eccentric voice Monoma, a wild look his eyes and a smile just as deranged. Who made you the leader? Tsu asked, eyeing the loud blonde and wondering if she would end up finding him or Bakugo more insufferable by the end. But who else has the tactical brilliance? He asked, gesturing to himself, as if the answer was as obvious as the sun in the sky. As he finished stroking his ego, the buzzer for the match to start rang through the air. Firstly, might I have your hands? He smiled as both Tsu and Tokoyami looked to each other. While they hadn't talked before, they could each tell that they didn't want to follow this guy's instructions. I promise, our victory will be quick if you do, he continued. I'll even let either of you go in first if you'd like. Both looking to each other, they each extended a hand towards the pompous blonde. Monoma wasted no time shaking Tokoyami's hand with that same smile. But when he shook her hand, his smile faltered and turned to one of confusion and disappointment. After that, the trio moved to the building's entrance but found it locked tight. I'm a man of my word. Which one of you would like to go first? He asked as Tokoyami volunteered. His eyes before two massive spectral arms erupted from his cloak, the taloned limbs smashing through the door and crumpling it like paper. Sparing little time to assess his power, they moved in with quiet steps, listening for any unfamiliar noise in the silence. Though as Tokoyami entered the darkness, Tsu could have sworn she saw the darkness reach out and swirl around him. With Kirishima on their team, they were all but expecting him to bursting out of a wall. But as they moved from floor to floor, they did not find him. All they found was more locked doors. Where are they? Tokoyami whispered. They checked every floor and they were running out of time. This is the last room, Tsuyu told him, her own anger beginning to show. She wished she could use her hydrosense to find out where they were like Izuku could with his radar pulse. But she had learned while training she could only sense things if they were in the same body of water. With a grunt, Tokoyami smashed the door to the final room open, the door getting caught in Shiro's tape that covered the room like cobwebs. Moving in, they didn't see anything, but for a moment they heard something falling. From behind them, something hit the ground hard, sending up a cloud of dust and launching Tsuyu and Tokoyami flying into the web of tape. Ha, it worked, Shiro, came the voice of Kirishima as he pulled himself out of the floor, and looking up he could see where he had come from. High up on the ceiling were the smiling faces of Shiro and Yosutsu. She could see that they had used Yosutsu's quirk to climb their way up and stuck the bomb to the ceiling. Sorry Tsu, nothing per. Kirishima tried to apologize before an ear-splitting scream filled the room. Ah, my arm, my arm. Shiro, help me, came the desperate plea of Monoma as everyone tried to look through the dust that had still not settled. Oh my god, Monoma, are you okay? Shiro answered back, both he and Kirishima racing to help him. But they were both caught off guard as two black spectral hands erupted from the cloud and grasped them, one in each. If it were possible to be any more surprised, Tsu wouldn't have believed it as Monoma walked out of the cloud completely fine and even more, with a dark spectral figure coming out of his stomach that looked like Tokoyami's. My, rushing to help an injured hero. You guys make terrible villains, Monoma gloated through a wide smile. Tsu, Tokoyami, get the bomb, Monoma ordered, and though neither liked him, they didn't want to lose either. Tokoyami was the first to get out, using his dark shadow to tear away at the tape that held him in place. Tsuyu took longer as she covered herself in water and began to struggle, using the water to wear away at the tape's adhesive. Tokoyami sent his dark shadow after Yosutsu, who had nowhere to run and couldn't risk jumping without risking getting injured, which only resulted in his swift capture. Once she was out, she wasted no time and tried to leap up to the bomb, but when she tried, she barely jumped 5 feet. The realization that with most of her frog quirk gone, so too was her jumping ability. Tokoyami had no such problems as Dark Shadow's other hand grasped the bomb and secured their victory. Heroes win, the voice of All Might said. Monoma, how could you? This is super unmanly. I did it because I knew you'd fall for it, he answered as he released the pair, both of them staring daggers into the blonde who smiled like he couldn't care less. So your quirk allows you to copy other people's quirks, Tokoyami said as Monoma's dark shadow dissipated. Correct, Battle 5. Team E versus Team F. Mina bounced on the balls of her feet, eagerly waiting with a determined look in her eyes as she watched the villain team enter the building. She had taken being last in the quick assessment test to heart and she was going to make certain that they won here. They would have 5 minutes before they could go in, but they needed a plan. Unfortunately, she had never been good at making plans beyond going to a place and seeing what happened, always going on intuition and flying by the seat of her pants, but that wasn't going to work here. She hadn't seen what the people on the other team could do besides seeing Ibara use her vine hair to throw the ball in the assessment test. She looked to her teammates, hoping to reassure of their chances, and immediately cringed when she noticed Aoyama was spending his time twirling around his cape and striking poses in his new costume. That left Kamakiri, the tall boy that looked like a human praying mantis hybrid with large pincers sticking out of each side of his mouth and a punk mohawk. She watched as the boy observed the building and hoped he had some kind of plan as she walked up to him. "Hey mantis man, you got a plan," she said, beaming a smile that fell flat as the man gave her a hard glare. "Piss off," he muttered as he went back to looking at the building and left Mina to glare back at him. "Great, as if one Bakugo wasn't bad enough," she sighed, slumping her shoulders and damning her luck. Rolling her eyes at her situation, she could only do one thing. Keep it simple. If anything gets in her way, melt it. And as the buzzer rang, she barely had time to recognize the green shaded blur that rushed by her. Running after the green blur and dragging Mr. Twinkles with her as they moved through the building. Strangely though, as they moved the winding corridors, she couldn't hear any sound of Kamakiri. She figured he would have found them by now. It was then she started to see mushrooms. Not many, 1 or 2 here or there, but soon the walls began to be covered in it, and it was getting hard to breathe. Beginning to cough and looking to see that Aoyama was looking good either, they both finally began to hear something, giggling. "Sword guy thought he was tough, but he couldn't get past me," a high-pitched voice cheered, as if she was delighted to just say the words. "We need to get away from these mushrooms," she gagged as grabbed Aoyama by the hand, leading him away as the giggling continued to grow. Even as they escaped to a lower floor, the pair still coughed and gagged. What was wrong? What was her quirk? Then she felt something on her, followed by another and another. Looking down at herself, she saw that mushrooms were growing on her body, sprouting full-grown on her skin. Mina panicked, trying to brush them off, which only seemed to spread them and make them grow faster. Desperate to get them off, she covered herself in her acid, the mushrooms sizzling and dissolving. Turning to look at Aoyama, she could see that he too was getting covered in mushrooms, and quickly tried to get them off Eve as he tried to stop her. "No, you will ruin my magnificent cape. It is made of silk," Aoyama cried, as Mina had to resist the urge to smack him upside the head. She paid his pleas no time as she covered him in her lower acidic goo. The metal of his armor being spared, but his red glasses and cape burned away in a shower of slime. "There you big baby, now we need to," she tried to say before they heard footsteps coming from further up the stairs. "Heroes, you're running out of time. Heroes, come out and play," the voice said, singing the words like a nursery rhyme. "What is this, a horror movie?" Mina gasped as she grabbed Aoyama and kept running. What were they going to do? They couldn't run forever. She then saw a window in another room. Dragging the boy with her, she slammed the door behind them. Finally letting go of Aoyama, she ran to the window and looked outside. The bomb was on the floor above them, but it was on another side of the building, and it left her with only one option. "We're gonna climb outside," she said as she looked back to the terrified blonde. "What? That is crazy. We will fall," he decried as Mina lifted her hand, and acid began to drip from her fingertips. "I'll create handholds and carry us up," she walked up to him, not in any mood to argue as Aoyama backed away and tripped on his purple cape. Aoyama whimpered as he clung onto Mina's back, the pink-skinned girl lobbing a blob of acid at the window. "Let's go," she said as she adjusted to the weight, walking up to the opening and hopping out. Using her acid, she began to shimmy her way along the building's wall. "When we get inside, blind them," she said as she looked for the right window. Going and going, she finally reached the corner of one window and looked inside to see Ibara and Kaibara watching the door and not looking out the window. "All right, let's do this," she said as reeled her hand back and punched straight through the glass, throwing herself inside as if passenger weighed nothing. But in her haste, she hadn't noticed that Ibara covered the floor with her vines. Ibara only needed to realize where they were before the vines lashed out like vipers, wrapping them both up in a cocoon. "I'm sorry, Mina," Ibara said. She and Kaibara looked at the bound heroes. "Now all we have to do is wait out the clock." This was bad. This was really bad. She couldn't use her quirk to get out without injuring Aoyama, and if she didn't get out soon, they would lose. They needed to get out, and they needed to get out now. Aoyama burned the vines, she told him, doing her best to wiggle to one side of the cocoon and out of the laser's path. "But you will be burned too," Aoyama said in hesitation, but Mina would not have it. Do it, she repeated, tensing her jaw. She refused to accept defeat, and if she needed to get burned, so be it. As Aoyama audibly gulped, Mina began to feel the heat build up. But strangle, she didn't feel it near her midsection where she thought it would. Instead, to her shock, it came from near her face as Aoyama pressed his palms to the vines and began to glow. Mina did not have the time to question, though, as she began to feel the heat wash over her. She bit her lip so hard it began to bleed as the vines began to smoke. She watched through a gap in the vines as the confident smiles on her opponents grew worried as more vines tried to reinforce the burning ones. More heat, she groaned as the heat increased, and Mina pushed against the vines with all her might. Pushing and pushing, they finally overpowered the vines, the two spilling out and into the rotating arms Kaibara. Instinctively, Mina pulled up her arms to defend herself, the attack hitting hard and sending to the left. The pain in her arms and face was awful, and she thought she smelt burning hair, but the realization of a drill arm bearing down on her gave her motivation to move. Dodging out of the way of the attack, she dosed the floor with her acid, melting the vines and forcing her attacker to slow down. Looking to see Aoyama, she could see that surprisingly he was holding his own, dodging and letting out blasts of light from his belly button that burned and vines that came close. Why wasn't he using his hands? She wondered as she was nearly caught again as Kaibara leaped over the acid pool and tried to kick her, the limbs sailing over her as she leaned back so far her back was parallel to the floor. Using her momentum, she kicked up and tried to catch him in the chin. But at the last moment he pulled his head away, the sole of her shoes just grazing him. Landing back on her feet, she tried to punch him and found her attack redirected out of the way and his arms slamming into her neck and sending her sprawling to the ground. Landing hard, she turned only see Kaibara's fist. Desperate and out of options, she reached out and gripped the rotating forearm with all his strength. And to her surprise and his pain, she stopped the strike, the sudden change in torque dislocating his elbow and made him howl in pain. And before anyone could properly realize what had happened, the wall on the other side of the building burst open. Emerging out of the smoke like a monster from a horror movie was Titan of mushrooms that screamed like a demon from hell. Everyone was too shocked by what they were saying before it blitzed past them and grabbed the bomb. Heroes win. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-if stories and other amazing videos coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious.